to the Motor City. Our guy Jim Costa
Ayo.
checking in from Detroit. What's going on, brother? How are you?
Hey, Jay, what's up?
Man, listening to the NBA talk with our guy Brandon Kravitz, the Orlando Magic. Who would have thought, man?
Yeah, man. Hey.
A couple of New York and Detroit guys. We're clamoring for the early '90s days again. My
There
friend.
we go. Early 2000s a little bit for the Pistons. Yeah.
Yeah, you got that right, man. All right, let's start with the big game, man. Michigan and Ohio State. I mean, my goodness, this was a game that I said it the other day on Twitter. I don't have a dog in the race, but it's one of my favorite rivalries. You know, I love Ravens and Steelers. I love Michigan and Ohio State, but to be able to watch that game, the longer that game went on, I know Detroit, Michigan, just everybody up there, they were like, this is too close. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
Everybody's looking at how Ohio State's supposed to blow them out and all this. And then you keep watching that game. And even if like you look away and like it's still tied, I mean, at what point did you really feel like, hey, this could really happen? The upset really could be cooking here.
Yeah, I mean, it's an obsession, this rivalry, right? And the obsession for Ohio State was they were finally going to get the Wolverines. You're 3-touchdown favorites. You got it at your house. It's 365 days ready to lay a beat down on. And when I looked at halftime and it was 10-10, I thought, uh-oh, they've got another meltdown in them. Because at the half, Michigan had 10 points. But those two scoring drives were 2 yards and 3 yards. Like Ohio State had let them in. Ohio State had just scored before the half. And it was like, hey, they've let Michigan hang in, and if it gets to the fourth quarter, we've seen how this goes. Wolverines are going to pull away on the ground, and they did, and it's Ryan Day again with a stupid look on his face. 4 straight losses in the rivalry, and I would say that's the most humiliating loss that they've had in some time.
Jim Costa, host of the morning, 6 to 10, 97.1, the ticket up there in Detroit. Listen, I don't know. I mean, can you be unbiased and talk about Ryan Day?
Yeah, well,
like for me on the outside, I'm looking at him and I'm not biased at all. I don't see it. Like if you go to a place like Ohio State, where you look at all of these big time recruits, you have such an incredible backfield. You can get the pick of the litter in so many different places, right? You have all of this money. And then year after year, you just come up short in these big games. And then you pick fights with the Lou Holtzes of the world. And the Jim Harbaugh comment of like starting on third base, like from somebody from the outside, like the more the years go by, you're like, man, Jim was probably right.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like he wants to prove that they're tough. And I don't think they are tough. So they end up with this fake tough bravado thing where Michigan, not a very good football team. The only thing they had going for them is Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant in the middle of their defense. So what does Ryan Day do? Stubbornly runs up the middle over and over. And you've got elite athletes on the outside. They don't have Will Johnson, NFL cornerback. Mm-hmm. He's not playing. Like, you got to get this out of your head about you're going to be the tougher football team. Go play your ball. Win the game. And they are in his head. And now Ohio State having a Michigan problem. They're also having a Ryan Day problem because I really transparently don't know what they do here. They're going to be in the playoff. They still have a chance to win the national title. But the expectation, and he talked about this, beat Michigan, win the national title. There's casualties if you don't get those things done. So if you're Ohio State, I mean, it's a big buyout, but the standards are high. What you call Vrabel? Marcus Freeman played at Ohio State back in the day. Like, they need an A-level guy. Otherwise, are they just going to run him back? And that doesn't feel sustainable either.
I think Vrabel seems like an NFL guy, but if you would go to college, I mean, Ohio State is one of those jobs where NFL guys look at and go, right? Like there's got to be 5 or 6 jobs in college where an NFL guy would look at it and go, I really want to be an NFL guy, but that might be a life-changing job, right? Because as much as we love for Vrabel, right? Good coach with Tennessee, obviously known from his days playing with the Patriots. Is Ohio State that job where he would look at and go, or no? Or do you think he's just going to wait for that next NFL gig?
It does feel like he'll have an NFL offer this offseason.
Right.
And I couldn't fault the guy for saying that's the NFL. It's the highest level. I don't have to deal with NIL and transfer portals and college headaches. My point to you would be if I'm Ohio State and I'm spending $20 million on my roster and that's what I'm getting, I'd hand him 10 to 12, 12 to 13, make him the highest paid coach in the sport and make him say no. And he still may say no. And then if you're Ohio State, you're left scrambling.
Yeah, it's almost like the Danny Hurley thing with the Lakers, right? Like, nobody thought he was going to leave UConn to go for the Lakers, but it was almost like, all right, go offer him the money, and then you go back and you get a pay raise, right? Yeah. Like, that's what you got to play the game. And for so long, I mean, these universities and even these franchises and the pros, like, they can they're the puppet masters, and there's very few times where the players and the coaches, they have that kind of leverage. I think they should do something with that. On the Michigan side, the celebration, obviously after the game, what was your whole take of how that whole thing transpired? Because that was almost just like another whole aspect of the game. In my mind, it kind of overshadows what the Wolverines did during the victory.
I think it kind of plays into the overall narrative, though, right? It's this idea that Ohio State they got spoiled. They got upset, and Michigan got under their skin again. And that continued even after the game. So, Michigan, they want to plant the flag. To the victor goes the spoils. They want to have their moment. And teams have had that moment at Michigan's expense this season. Texas Longhorns roll in, non-conference, big win early in the season. They plant that flag, and there wasn't a brawl. There wasn't pepper spray. There wasn't macing going on. Michigan had to take the loss, right? I mean, because someone hurts your feelings doesn't mean you're allowed to get physical and erupt. And if you're Ohio State, you had 4 quarters to be the physical team, to win your game, to hold down your field. They lost, and they didn't like that they lost, and they don't like that pit in their stomach again, so it turns ugly and it turns violent. And didn't need to get that way, but it did.
Yeah, and I look at this game for Michigan. How important is that going to be moving forward? Like with Coach Moore, and obviously it's so tough, right? You lose all these players, you lose your coach, you lose kind of your identity. I've actually been kind of, and this is from an outside perspective, I've been kind of impressed with Michigan kind of fighting to keep this whole thing together, because they're clearly outmatched. They clearly don't. They're trying to find the quarterback. They have the interior defensive lineman. I've been impressed the way that they've kind of galvanized and played tough in some of these games. That win against USC earlier on this year, I was like, that was some big boy stuff right there. Of course, we're not looking at them as national contenders, but I think in some ways you can tell the real character of a team when they don't have everything going for them. What is your idea of the team kind of this whole season? And then moving forward, how long is it going to take for them to get back to that elite status?
I would say the last 2 weeks have been critically important for Michigan because prior to that, you're staring down a team that, even though they lost guys, still felt like they were underachieving. You got a 12-team playoff. Even if you lose a couple games, you could have been sniffing on the outside, 9-10 wins. That was kind of the preseason expectation, even with the losses. And for them to be staring down, fighting for bowl eligibility 2 weeks ago, it did feel like there was starting to be some sharks circling with Sharon Moore. And I don't think he was ever in danger of being fired, but you know how fans get, and they go, boy, he just kind of inherited the job. He's in over his head. And there were some puzzling decisions in the middle of the season. But the last 2 weeks, beating Northwestern is not a big deal, but putting up 50 points, getting to bowl eligibility, then landing the number 1 recruit in America from your own backyard, Belleville High School, bringing in Bryce Underwood. So now you have a signature recruit. You're playing the NIL game. You're in the modern football. You're bowl eligible. That's okay. But then beating Ohio State 2-0 now for Sharon Moore in the rivalry where these coaches are defined. It feels like in 2 weeks' time, they have a signature recruit, a signature win, real momentum going into the offseason. And instead of being this like mediocre 500 football team, they actually have something to sell their fan base and recruits and revitalize the program.
One thing I love about Coach Moore, and I know he caught a lot of flack from this last year too, is like, this guy's emotional, right? Yeah. He bleeds Michigan, right? And I think people on the outside, you'll make fun of it, but if you're a Michigan guy, you get it, right? You get it. You're like, that's the kind of guy I want. Like, he's not like, I'm going to give you some coach speak BS. Like, he's like, dude, I'm here. I'm giving you everything I have. Players going to run through a wall for that. And it kind of is the juxtaposition of him and a guy like Ryan Day, where it seems like it's all fake tough guy stuff. So you could have a better team, but right, you have one guy on one side that's emotional and it seems like his heart's on the right place. And you have Ryan Day, where it's like, I'm not buying half the stuff this guy's selling.
Yeah, I mean, for Sharon, he has to kind of come out of the Harbaugh shadow a little bit, and I think that's been a challenge for year one. But at his core, you're right. Like, the guy played offensive line at Oklahoma. He was the offensive line coach and then the offensive coordinator at Michigan while they were winning the Big Ten titles. He's not new to this. It's not foreign or fake. And, he candidly would tell you that this year wasn't good enough and wouldn't run from that. The standards are high at Michigan, right? He would talk about that all the time. But I think he also understands this rivalry, and I think that's been very clear when he was filling in last year on game day and obviously this season leading up to this game. He had his guys ready to play. They were not going to be a team that could win that game 35-31. They were going to have to win a rock fight. It was going to have to be ugly. They were going to have to hang tough, and they didn't even throw for 100 yards in the game. But they knew TOP, run the ball, make Ohio State make mistakes, dare them to run it, and hope they fall into that trap, and they did. And he outcoached Ryan Day again, and he'll get the last laugh in that.
It's so crazy that that happens, right? All these things and questions about Jerome Moore, and he's out coaching a guy, Ryan Day, who's been pretty much given this fantastic team with all these top tier recruits. You mentioned about expectations. The expectations can't be much higher than for your Detroit Lions up there, Jim. You and I have been talking about them
Yep.
for the last couple of years. It's so cool to see their gradual ascension. And I asked my buddy Ian Beckles, who I used to do the show with years ago, and who's the one team that you love watching, the team that can really take their game in October, November, December, and take it to January and February. And he says the Detroit Lions. How fun is it to watch a team like the Detroit Lions with Dan Campbell, knowing they're going to run the football? You know what they're going to do. They're going to play that black and blue style. They're going to leave it all out there, and they're going to go and they're going to make you. I used to say this about the Giants, right, for many years. That's one of those teams like you're proud to be a fan of. I feel like the Detroit Lions are that team in the NFL right now. Not the Chiefs, right? It's easy to be the fan of the Super Bowl champs, right? But the Detroit Lions fans out there, because of all of what you went through and because the way and the style that you play, proud to be a Detroit Lions fan. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Oh yeah, I mean the fan base here is ignited. They are euphoric. There's bliss. They feel invincible. I would tell you, Lions fans. I mean, you win 10 in a row, even with some of the injuries they've had and some of the challenges, big road games, division games, good teams, and they just keep winning. And to your point, the way they win, it's physical, but it's also creative, right? They're breaking out trick plays. They're involving offensive linemen. So they're fun and they're tough and they're smart. And it's the offense that led the way even last year when they really broke out. And it's the defense that's gotten better this year, even with the Aiden Hutchinson injury. And then it's all tied together in a nice, tidy bow by one of the most likable coaches in sports. I mean, Dan Campbell is a treat for Lions fans. They love this guy. He's ushered in winning that candidly they never thought they'd see. I mean, as someone who grew up here, as someone who grew up a Lions fan, like the idea that you'd be talking seriously about the Lions in the Super Bowl and as the Super Bowl favorite, it felt like you always kind of held out a little bit of hope because otherwise, why are you a fan? But it always felt so far away, and now it's right staring them in the face.
Before I let you go, Jim, I'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little hockey because
Here we
that's
go.
my bread and butter. I'm sorry, but you and I have been talking about the Iser plan for the last couple of years, and I texted you earlier this year, kind of giving you the heads up of like just watching the team, and I feel like they should be farther along, and there are some good players on the team, but and we talked about this with Michigan and Ohio State. You got to know your roles, and you have to have players in the right spot. You have to have your coach putting those players in the right spot. Is Dylan Larkin a first line center? Are these guys around him really the right pieces? Did they do the right thing on the back end? Do they have the right goalie in place? Like, are there any other questions that I
was going to say,
asked?
too many questions when you're in your sixth year. And Steve Yzerman has as much rope as a general manager could have for any sport, for any team, because obviously some of it is the emotions of he played in Detroit. He wore the C, the iconic photos, him hoisting the Stanley Cup as the leader. And then, of course, in Tampa, being an architect for what they built, and depending on how much credit you want to give, was still down there. And I thought certainly had cut some hockey chops as a general manager and as executive. And everybody knew you were going to have to be patient. He was inheriting a tough situation, handed a really tough spot. And I think everybody has been patient. But then you reach a point where 6 years in, you can't be asking that many questions. I mean, up and down the lineup. I mean, if you're staring at your salary situation going, boy, we don't have much wiggle room, and they're all your guys, and your team's kind of capped out, and you're maybe a playoff team if we're fortunate here in Detroit. Yeah, I mean, there are some real questions, tough questions that nobody wants to ask about Steve Yzerman, but we kind of have to at this point.
No doubt. And again, the one guy you look at is, you're looking at a guy like Al Murray, one of the directors of scouting down here in Tampa. You got to find those 4th, 5th, 6th round guys. You got to find the Kutrovs and the Plots of the world, the Braden Points. He's driving Vasilevsky in the first round, of course, right? But you got to get those middle round guys if you're going to be successful. And for your sake, my friend, I hope that happens to you. Jim Costa, the mornings 6 to 10 there, 97.1 The Ticket up there in Detroit. Jim, I know you're a busy man. It's a busy day for you. Congratulations on all your success. I appreciate your time. We'll talk to you again soon, partner.
Always got time for you, Jay. Appreciate it. Anytime.